Hello, everybody. I'm here today with Trogdor Jr., and we're going to be talking about morality today. We were supposed to be talking about the presuppositional argument, but because I'm not really all that prepared to, or all that skilled at using it, I don't want to, be a bad representation of the argument. So we're going to be talking about morality. So Trogdor is going to go first, and then I'm going to go, and then it's going to be more like an informal kind of debate. All right. So go ahead, Trogdor.
Cool. Thank you for the intro. So I think, like we were talking about a little bit earlier, I think the important thing when we're talking about morality is defining what exactly we're talking about so we're all on the same page. And I think one of the best ways that I've heard it explained is trying to use the analogy of a board game. Chess seems to be a really good example to use when you're talking about evaluating different circumstances or different actions that we can take and whether or not they are moral on the spectrum of good or bad, however you want to define that. I would define good and bad when we're talking about morality as good being that which promotes human flourishing or societal flourishing, however much you want to include that, if you want to talk about just humans or the good of the planet, the good of our society, our culture, including animals or plant life with that, taking care of the environment, whatever it is. You can be as broad or general as you want to be, or specific as you want to be. But flourishing, getting the most benefit for the most amount of people as possible. Whereas you contrast that with bad on the moral scale is the worst possible conditions you can imagine for everyone. So I think those are the two extremes for the spectrum. And using those extremes or those ends of the spectrum, you can then judge actions based on their consequences with whether or not they lead closer to one or the other side. And I think it does kind of boil down to the closed system. Anybody in the system that you're talking about, their morals, that's what you're defining, or you're determining whether something is moral or not. Anything that's outside of that system of morality really doesn't have any bearing on it. So, for instance, the chess game, there's specific rules and there's a objective. Winning is the good side of the spectrum, and losing the game is the bad side of the spectrum. So you can evaluate each move in terms of whether or not it gets you closer to winning or closer to losing the game. And there's a number of different moves that you can possibly make, and not all of them are equally as good or equally as bad. Some of them may be neutral, like they may not necessarily get you ahead or further behind in the game. And there's different strategies like that. And I think morality is a lot like that. I think it's a lot more complicated than a board game, obviously. But I think it's all self-contained in a system in a social species that is trying to better their society or their closed system, however broad you want to take that. So that's kind of my take on where I'm coming from with the whole discussion, and I guess my intro.
Okay, so I guess it's my turn now. I think it's important for the people who are watching this to understand that we're both going to be looking at this subject from our different, presuppositions. Trogdor, I'm assuming you're an atheist. I think I'm sure you'll let me know in a second. Kind of silly of me to have this debate and not know that. But
no, you are correct.
Okay, cool. I'm coming from the presupposition that that this is the word of God, and that you know what I mean, and that and that I believe that God exists. But before I even go there, I do believe in a concept of absolutes. Absolute good or absolute right and wrong, good and evil, whatever you want to call it for the time being, or morality. Okay, I don't believe that morality evolved through the process of evolution, nor do I believe that we can learn morality from the animal kingdom. I believe that all of us have I believe all of us have a certain amount of common sense where we can determine that something is either right or wrong, absolutely right, absolutely wrong. Are there some gray areas? We'll see during this debate. But But I believe that you need an absolute authority or an absolute standard of morality in order to be able to say that something is right or whether or not it's wrong. Because if you don't have an absolute standard to be able to determine, like, let's say, for example, that slavery is wrong or rape is wrong or child molestation is wrong, if you don't have an absolute standard for that, and then what you're doing is you're expressing your own opinion. And that's my my intro for now, because I know we're going to be getting into the actual conversation. Okay, we agreed that you would go first, Trogdor.
Yeah, so I think we were kind of going into questions. Was that the idea?
Yeah,
back and forth
in the discussion. Yeah.
Okay.
And then we'll let the people watch it determine, like, what they think or whatever.
Well, you brought up an interesting point. Like, you don't think we can get morality from the animal kingdom. I guess, are you talking, or is that kind of coming more from the survival of the fittest, might makes right kind of mentality? Like the lion is more moral.
The kind of mentality that says that we evolved from a common ancestor, and that, morality is like an evolutionary trait. You know what I mean? How we can look at, give you an example, how we can look at pandas and how they interact with each other, and how we eventually learned from pandas, like it's probably right to be family oriented or something like that. That is what I reject.
Okay. And I don't know if I would go to that level of specificity and say, oh, well, we learned family values from this species of animal, and we learned not to kill people from this species of animal. But I think it does come down to the social structure of a species, and the more interdependent, like our species, for instance, works better and survives better if we work together. So obviously the things like don't kill babies is a moral good behavior if you don't kill your young, because obviously if you killed all your young, your species wouldn't survive. So that I think comes down to the whole common sense thing. Like what actions and their results are going to better your society or make it more likely that not only will your species survive, but that your species will flourish, and the majority of your species. And I think it's probably too specific to even say that your species, like what can I do for my family that's moral, that keeps both my kids and my dog and my cat flourishing? Like if I give all the food to my kids but forget my pets, they're going to die. So that's not moral, and that goes beyond species. So I think it encompasses the entire society and culture, and even probably just even the planet, like everyone that's living on it. I think all of those factors can play into what actions do you take that makes it mutually beneficial and maximally beneficial for as many people or living organisms on the planet as you can.
Okay, but if you take the position that that I think you said killing babies, I think, because you went into like different things, and when you said something about killing babies, it's probably not good because it wouldn't necessarily benefit the species. That would support my argument, in which in order for that to be true, that would have to be an absolute thing, because you just made an absolute statement saying that, well, killing babies is probably not the best thing for humanity, because if that kept happening over and over and over and over, we would eventually become extinct, which is why I would say that under no circumstances whatsoever would I ever consider killing babies a good thing, or how it could possibly benefit humanity whatsoever. You know what I mean? So, I would say that,
but I think, maybe there's
you need an absolute standard in order to be able to make a statement like that. Because if it's not an absolute standard, then I have to ask the question, well, how do you know that, because I know you went into the whole presuppositional argument and everything and whatnot. My question would be, how do you know that not killing babies would be beneficial to the species, or to mankind, rather?
Well, and I think that's a really good place to put in the difference, or highlight the difference between absolute and objective. I don't know that you necessarily. I think I would disagree with you that you need an absolute moral standard to say that killing your infants is wrong, but you do need an objective standard by which to base that action or judge that action against to determine whether or not it's right or wrong. And the objective measurement that I'm putting out there is, will that action result in the maximum number of living organisms on the planet to flourish? And if you judge the action against that standard,
could you define objective for me?
Sure, and I think the best way I can do it is go back to the analogy of the chess game. Objectively, you can judge whether or not moving a pawn to a certain position or trading your queen for another piece or something like that in any move in chess. You can objectively determine against the standard of winning the game. That's your goal. That's your objective. You can judge then the individual moves against that objective and say, is it getting me closer or further away from that objective? And that would be an objective standard, whereas an absolute standard would stand outside of the chess game and say, moving your queen to space B6 is always a bad move. And that type of absolute rule doesn't make much sense in that situation.
Okay, and I was saying in this situation that chess and issues of morality are two entirely different things. And I don't think it's a very good analogy. I'm a chess player.
No, I agree.
So,
they're not. They're not exact, but it is. I think it does. The analogy, I think, does serve to prove a point, or at least illustrate kind of where
deal with morality, though.
Where it comes from.
Use an example that deals with
morality system. Well, I'm using the chess game to differentiate between objective and absolute.
Okay.
So objective is the morality. I do think that there are objective moral standards.
Example?
I hesitate to say that there's absolute moral standards.
Give me an example of an objective moral standard.
It's wrong to kill babies.
Okay.
Now that's not a universal. It's not an absolute.
Why is it wrong to kill babies?
For instance, I mean, you could theoretically think of a situation where killing an infant is okay, or you cut out on me there a little bit. So why is it wrong to kill? Yep, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can
hear you. So if you ask the question, why is it wrong to kill babies? Objectively, in general, it is. However, there are situations where I would argue that it's not necessarily, not absolutely wrong. For instance, here's one example would be an unborn infant that is genetically not going to make it, and whatever condition they have is going to kill the mother if she continues the pregnancy. Terminating the pregnancy, thus killing that infant or baby, is morally superior to letting the baby live and kill the mother. So even though there's a objective general moral standard to say killing infants is probably wrong, there are going to be gray areas and specific instances where that may not necessarily hold true. So I can't say that it's an absolute standard, however, it is objective. Okay,
so since you think it's objective, then how do you feel about abortion?
It depends completely on the situation.
Depends on the situation, which would make it your opinion, or will make it relative.
Well, I believe the subject of abortion isn't specific enough to make an absolute judgment call on it.
Abortion is killing.
There are situations where
abortion is killing a baby.
But there are situations where abortion is preferable to, for instance, like the example I gave, letting the mother die. Because you know that the fetus inside is not viable, isn't going to survive, because it has a condition that we're well aware of medically that's not going to allow it to live. And letting it continue is for sure going to kill the mother.
And that's according to an opinion.
No, according to medical science.
According to
demonstrable facts. So those cases are going to be rare.
No, you don't understand what I'm saying. You don't understand what I'm saying. That in certain situations it would be a matter of an opinion. It wouldn't no longer be objective no more. At least I'm trying to understand what you're saying. That it would no longer be objective no more. Where I stand, when you're talking to a Christian, or somebody that believes in absolutes, we believe that it's absolutely wrong to kill a baby, under any circumstances, and that means abortion as well. Now, mind you, I'm not talking about compromise. Just hear me out a minute. I'm not talking about compromise. I'm not talking about gray areas like I mentioned earlier. Okay, I'm simply saying that is wrong under all circumstances. Okay, and if I'm allowed to talk here for a moment,
can I just clarify what you just said, though?
For example, just real quick. A lot of atheists like to use the example like, okay, well, you're an absolutist, but do you believe that lying is wrong? And I'll say yes. And then they'll say, what if lying can be used for good? And I'll be like, well, lying is still wrong. And then they'll come up with the example saying that lying will be okay. I think in the Bible they lied to save that the harlot, or Rahab, I think her name was, she lied and the spies that she was protecting was actually spared, and God was happy with the situation and whatnot. This is what the atheists will say, okay? That God was happy with the situation and those people was protected. But what I will say to them is, it doesn't stop the fact that it's wrong. And what God is doing is he's showing his grace towards that woman for what she did. His grace was sufficient to cover the wrong that she did. That's my position on it. So I understand the gray areas where a woman's life will be on the line due to an abortion. Okay. But at the same time, it doesn't negate the fact that a life was taken.
Agreed. But the situation that I gave, I think, was a little more specific than that, though. We're in a situation, for instance, that the fetus is
a life
for sure going to die. It's got a condition, and I can't think of one off the top of my head. I could probably Google it real quick, but I don't want to mess up my internet connection here. So the fetus has a condition that 100% terminal. The fetus will not live much longer, if at all. It definitely won't live if it's born. Just go with me on that situation. We know 100% that the fetus will not live. However, if it continues with the pregnancy, there's a good chance, let's just not say even 100%, but say 90+% chance that the mother will die if the pregnancy continues. Okay. In your worldview, is it morally wrong to abort the pregnancy at that point?
Well, again, it goes back to God's grace. In either situation, if she dies or the baby dies because of the doctor or whatever's being performed, or because of what's going on inside the woman, the fact of the matter is, it's still murder in the eyes of God. Now, or rather, it could be considered unrighteous killing, but at the same time, regardless of that, our Bible teaches us that God forgives us of these things, and we believe that God's grace will cover the situation, regardless of how difficult the situation is. Now, let's say, for example, like you have an abortion clinic, and you know what I mean, a woman just got pregnant or a young girl just got pregnant, and she doesn't want to have the pregnancy, and this situation has nothing to do with this and whatnot. You know what I mean? She can still go to an abortion clinic, abort the baby, whether it's a couple of weeks, years old, whether it's a few months, whether or not she's getting close to having the baby, it would still be wrong. You know what I mean? But at the same time, because you have forgiveness, and people can forgive you, or God can forgive you, or the absolute authority can forgive you because of it. You know what I mean? And it can make it a little bit more bearable. Not necessarily in the situation where the girl just wants to have it for the sake of wanting to have it. You know what I mean? Don't get me wrong, God can forget that too, but I'm talking about specifically the situation that you gave.
Right. So you're saying like the girl wants to have it, like using abortion as a form of birth control.
Unfortunately, a lot of this country is using it as a form of birth control, and that situation that you're coming up with is rare, very rare.
No, I agree. And I think, abortion as birth control is probably high on the list of that's wrong, or objectively closer to the wrong scale than that's okay, and I'm okay with that. I think there's tons of alternatives, and as a society we could do way better as far as education and making those things available, and that's a whole nother debate. But going, I guess, kind of switching over to the line.
Do you see what I mean when I say that you need an authority, or you need an absolute standard? And whether you agree with me or not is one thing, but do you understand why I say that we need an absolute moral standard, whether it be God, government, whether it be a person's belief systems? Because at the end of the day, people have this. That's how they're able to offer their opinions. You know?
Yeah, well, I think maybe we're still cloudy on the whole differentiation between objective and absolute. Maybe if I can clarify that again, I think absolute is someone outside of the moral system making judgments on this action is always 100% black wrong, and this action is always 100% white right. There's black and white, there's no gray, and this is evil and this is good. And it's outside of the system, whereas objective is, here's our goal, here's what the objective is, here's where we want to get, and based on that goal, we're making judgments on any individual action as to whether or not it gets us closer to that objective or further away. And that's why I use the chess game. I understand it's not a perfect analogy, but maybe I can try and put it a different way. So the objective, obviously, of the game is to win. So that's the good spectrum. 100% good is always a move that wins the game. 100% bad move is one that loses the game or causes you to lose the game. And there's moves all the way in between. There's ones that get you closer to winning and ones that get you further away. The objective morality or the objective system of judgment would say, does this move get me closer to winning? Does it advance my strategy to getting closer to a checkmate? Or does it get me further away? And an absolute standard for chess in that case would say it's always a bad move to trade your queen for a pawn. Whereas in reality, that move might be an okay move. It might be a good move. There's not an absolute hard fast. You can't say this action or this move is always bad or always going to be a losing move, because it's not. And I think the same holds true with morality. You can't say this action will always move you further away from the maximum number of living organisms on the planet flourishing as much as possible, or this move will make it draw you closer, or this action will draw you closer towards the worst possible suffering for every living organism on the planet.
Okay.
I don't think it's that simple.
And again, the example of chess. I play chess, and I've traded my queen for a pawn, and I've actually won games doing that. So I understand what you're talking about.
So there's not an absolute.
You know what I mean? But that's very situational. It depends on what's going on in the game, whether or not you're a move away from checkmating somebody, or 2 moves away from checkmating somebody, whether or not you want to throw a distraction. It's a lot of what ifs in that.
Right.
A lot of uncertainty in that. And I think the good thing about, and this is my argument, the good thing about absolutes is you always know what is right and what is wrong, versus the other point of view as well. It depends on the situation and whatnot. You know what I mean? Is this thing always the right thing to do? You know what I mean? It's always good to have like that set of morality. That absolute standard. Whether it be the government,
so let's tie
local governments, federal governments, whether it be the police or anyone, at least we know for certain, you know what I mean, that if you do this, it's wrong. We're not talking about forgiveness. We're not talking about, compromise. We're not talking about, what about this situation or whatever. We just know all the time that this is wrong. Okay, and that's why I support that more than these other arguments that I'm hearing, because all those arguments are situational, and they're filled with what ifs. They're just filled with it, and there's a lot of confusion.
But I think it really does come down to
situational.
Okay, let's go to a specific example, see if I can tie it back and make a little more sense of the whole chess analogy that I'm trying to make. So let's go to the lying thing. You are a German citizen in World War II, and you are hiding Jewish people in your basement, and the Nazi police come and knock on your door and say, hey, are there any Jews staying here? You say no. That's a lie. Now, that's saying that the lie is wrong, is saying is basically the same thing as saying trading your pawn for a queen is always wrong. It is the wrong thing to do. When in reality, the situation dictates that no, lying in that case is more moral than not lying. It gets you better results in the grand scheme of things than telling the truth. Whereas if you have the absolute, telling the truth is always right, but life is full of situations, and you have to judge the morals
if
on the
telling the truth was
objective.
always right, then those Jews that was hidden, the people should have been honest about hiding those Jews. That's what you're trying to say, right?
In absolute morality, yes. That's why
All right.
And the extreme examples, admittedly, are easier to make that contrast.
Okay. But I still disagree with you, though. You see, lying would still be, and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to make it so simple where it's like, this guy isn't really thinking about this. I am. You know what I mean? The fact of the matter is when you got a standard of absolute morality, you can look at something and say, you know what, it's wrong for me to lie. You know what I mean? But somewhere down the road, somebody's going to forgive me for doing this. And then in the example that you're giving with Nazi Germany, you know what I mean? With hiding the Jews, I know we're not talking about God and the Bible and everything, but God would use something like that for good, to be able to preserve someone a little bit longer for whatever his purposes are. He would allow it to happen. He would use it for good. There's something in the Bible, I think it's in Isaiah, I'm not 100% sure, where it says that God creates evil. And that word evil has two definitions. One of them is the evil that we see, killing people for no apparent reason whatsoever, raping people just because you feel like doing it, you know what I mean? Or robbing a store because just because you want a new pair of sneakers or something like that. That's evil. But the other evil that I'm talking about that God creates is calamity. He allows certain things to happen in the world so that he'll have a greater purpose come out. Like, for example, he'll allow a nation to come in and raid another nation, like the nation of Israel in the Bible. He'll allow Babylon to go in there and to raid their city, take all their wealth, bring them to their country as slaves for one purpose, to get them to turn from the evil that they were doing. And the moment that happens, God will set them free and put them back in their own land, which is what we see in the scriptures. So, but then again, they ended up sinning again, and God had to, do some other things and whatnot, or allow some other things to happen to them. But that's the point where I'm getting at. God will allow someone to tell a lie, knowing full well that when the person, because God's not telling the person to lie. Let me say this again for the people that's going to be watching this. God is not telling the person to lie. However, God sees the person using the lie. The people that's looking for the Jews believe the lie. They leave. You know what I mean? And by the way, not in every situation in Nazi Germany did that work, because they would check the house and they would find some of the Jews. Sad but true. But if somebody sneezes or something like that, and they'll hear them, and the Germans that was hiding them will be punished, as well as the Jews that was hiding as well. But God will use that particular lie, you know what I mean, and be like, you know what? I'm going to preserve these people, and when the whole world's over, I'm going to glorify my name through these people. Now, I know, we're not talking about God and his existence and everything, but I just felt like I had to bring that into it, considering, who and what I am and whatnot. But I still hold to what I'm saying. So then, with having that absolute, you have to know what is right and what is wrong, because the moment it gets too situational, well, what if, it causes confusion. You have to, like in a game of chess, for example. I'll use an example in a game of chess. You want to know what? In a game of chess, the rook always moves straight. That rule never changes. The rook always moves straight. Okay? The pawn always, on his first move, can either move 2 spaces forward or 1. The pawn always captures a piece moving diagonal. We see absolutes there. But when you're talking about the actual game and you're actually playing the game of chess, you know what I mean? These are situational things, and it can just cause a lot of confusion, because you're right in the sense when you're using that example. I can't tell you that if you trade your pawn for a queen, you know what I mean? I'm sorry, you trade your queen for a pawn, you're going to lose every time, because that's not true. I've won a whole bunch of games tricking somebody into believing they made a good move, and my next move is checkmate, because I'm trying to get them to move something. You know what I mean? So not everybody's dumb enough to do something like that.
I think we almost agree to a point. in your examples there, it's God looks down on the person lying, whatever the case may be. And I admitted the Nazi Germany thing is probably overused and not perfect. But, yeah, I'm lying for a good purpose to protect innocent people from people that I know mean them harm, whatever the case may be. But God looks down on that and can suspend judgment of this absolute lying is always wrong because his objective or his plan, there's going to be more good from it later. So I think we're back to the whole, it's an objective call. Now, in your worldview, with the God looking down and saying, okay, now it's okay for that person to lie because of the situation, I'm going to use that bad, wrong, morally evil act of lying to produce more good, it's still an objective call. But we're not making it, God's making it in that case. And we've just added that extra layer of the God looking down saying, in the end, the objective is for as many people as possible to be in heaven, for instance, and they're going to be flourishing there, and it's going to be the maximum benefit for the maximum number of people. And with that objective in mind, that lie allowed me to do more good to spread my word and get more people to believe in me and end up in heaven. So it's still morality based on an objective.
It's very important to understand that the person that believes that lying is wrong is God or the absolute authority. If you're not a Christian or an atheist or you're just a regular somebody that believes in random things or whatever, the important thing is to understand that is the final authority. Oh boy, I think I lost you. Here we go. Okay, that the final authority.
Am I still there?
No, we're okay. That the final authority is the one that determines whether or not it's wrong or not. But for the individual person, I think you might be right to a certain point, to a certain degree too, because then that individual person outside of God or outside of the absolute authority can look at this and say, you know what, I know this is wrong, but I'm just going to do this one time. I'm not going to do it again. And I'm going to try to preserve these people. And then God can use that to protect those people in that situation and whatnot. But it doesn't change the fact that lying is still wrong and that we shouldn't do it.
So if I just want to make sure I'm understanding, not misrepresenting what you're saying here. So in some situations, it's okay, or God can make a judgment call and say that it's not necessarily that it's okay for the person to lie, but can overlook that. And the reason being is that it's for greater good in the end. Is that kind of what you're saying, or am I misunderstanding that?
Mostly. No, I mean, you got a lot of what I was trying to say. In the situation that you gave me with the whole Nazi Germany thing and whatnot, okay, we still understand that lying is wrong, that it's destructive and it hurts people and whatnot, okay? But in that particular situation that you gave, a person's going to say, you know what? I know lying is wrong, but if I do this, I'll preserve these people's lives. These people are coming to harm these people, to torture these people, to kill these people. You know what I mean? To do all kinds of evil against them and whatnot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell these people that they're not here. But under every other circumstance, I'm not going to lie to them because I know that lying is wrong. Because my absolute standard or my absolute standard of morality tells me it's wrong. Whether or not it's the government, local governments, governors, mayors, presidents, potentates, kings, or whatever, they're telling you it's wrong, then don't do it.
Can I interject real quick there?
Yes,
so,
go ahead.
You mentioned instead lying is wrong because it's destructive and it causes harm and that sort of thing. However, in that situation, that's kind of flipped on its head. Lying in that case potentially prevents more harm than it could possibly cause. So are we judging the morality of lying? Okay, so in that specific example, lying to the SS and protecting the Jews hiding in your attic or your basement or whatever, and they don't find them, and you've protected them and prevented that harm from those people, how does that, like, what harm or what damage did that lie cause?
Okay. for Christians, God says it's wrong to lie, and there's severe consequences for those people who lie. You know, maybe,
so is there
maybe he won't punish you. Just hear me out a minute. Maybe he won't punish you right then and in the natural, or maybe the government won't punish you right then and there, but they will remind you, look, you did it in this situation. You know what I mean? And God was able to use it. But if you start justifying it for other reasons and whatnot, and you keep doing it, you could be punishing it here and now. But you got to also remember, in the Christian worldview, there's a judgment that's coming after this. You understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And even though God, not you, used it for good to spare these people, because, you know, just because you say that somebody's not there doesn't mean that those people aren't going to go in there, start tapping around, looking around for these people and whatnot. You know what I mean? They still have to go looking around the house and not be able to find them. You know what I mean? Some of these people was hiding in the walls. They was hiding on the floor. Some of these people was hiding in refrigerators and all kinds of things like that and whatnot. You know what I mean? And a lot of times the Nazis couldn't find them. It wasn't until they sneezed or coughed or something like that that they was actually caught or something like that. Or sometimes they would use the stethoscopes and they would try to use to find these people. But in the situation that I'm using, like, you know, God was also involved in that situation as well. At least that's what I believe. That although this person lied and they're still looking for these people in here and whatnot, that God will somehow distract them so that they can't find them. Now, here's the thing. Let me ask you a question, Trogdor. From a Christian perspective, right? What if those people told the truth and said, yes, I have Jews in here, and said that to the SS, right? My question for you is this, okay? Could God still have protected them?
From a Christian perspective, yes. Okay. God, in a Christian worldview, would be able to do anything.
So the people that's lying and saying that they're not there, those people are living without faith. They don't believe that God can protect them, because once they be honest, they listen, they're underneath there. You know what I mean? They don't believe that God can intervene and protect them. You know, because there's always two sides to these coins too. You know what I mean? So, and don't get me wrong. The situation,
I don't know if we do, but do we have any
abortion? This stuff is not easy conversation to have, because you have a lot of emotion wrapped up in this. You have like a lot of, like, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I think those two examples are kind of those are further towards the ends of the spectrum, and they're easier to see the distinction, whereas something in the middle, more of a gray area, may or may not be. Like, is it morally right for my children to eat McDonald's? That's way murkier and more gray and whatnot.
You believe
so those kind of examples aren't as easy.
When it comes to morality.
I don't.
I mean, you really do.
I believe in objectives.
Do too.
I don't.
Okay. Can I ask you a question?
No. Sure.
What kind of atheist are you? A strong atheist, a weak atheist, agnostic atheist?
I'm not sure what any of those actually mean. The way I define it is that in the case of existing, I find God not guilty.
Okay,
if that makes sense. So if the evidence, as the evidence is laid out, correct. I don't make the claim that he does not, but I find him not guilty of existing. Meaning, right, I have no evidence to justify that belief.
Okay.
But it's not the same as saying not guilty doesn't mean innocent, if that makes sense.
Okay. Are you absolutely sure about that?
Absolutely sure about.
Are you absolutely sure about that?
Guilty doesn't mean, or not guilty is innocent? Yes, I'm absolutely sure about that.
So the good news is you do believe in absolutes then.
That's not a moral absolute. That's a definitional absolute.
That you believe in absolute morality too. I can show you right now if you like. What is your opinion about the morality of God and
moral absolutes? Okay, sure. The morality of God in the Bible?
Yeah. What's your opinion?
In what situation? Some of his actions are morally. Some of the actions are good. Some of them are not.
Are you absolutely
some of them move closer to the objective of having the maximum number of. Oh, I'm sorry.
Are you absolutely sure?
Am I cutting out on you? Absolutely sure. About
Are you absolutely
what?
Sure about what you just said about some of the acts that God does in the Bible are good and some of the acts that He does is evil? Are you absolutely sure about that?
From my worldview and standpoint on morality, yes. But all I can do is speak from my worldview. Or my perspective.
Which would make it your opinion. Right?
I suppose, yeah.
Okay.
You could say that, yeah.
When God flooded the world, was he morally, was God morally good for doing that? Or was he morally evil for flooding the world?
I don't think it happened.
Okay.
In the story, if we're going to talk about it like it's a myth. Okay, if we're going to talk about it like it's a myth.
So if you want to treat it like something that's written in the Bible, was God morally good for doing it, or was God not morally good for doing it?
Okay, let's not label it as a myth then. Let's take it word for word, verbatim. Absolutely, it happened exactly like it's stated in the Bible. Then yes, from that standpoint, it really comes down to I don't know enough about the Hebrew language to know what exactly it's meant by the evil. I can't remember exactly what it says. Like evil is on the mind of men was on evil all the time, or something like that. Is that accurate? I'd have to look it up.
In other words,
it's something about everyone
it was thinking about themselves. It wasn't thinking about God. It was only thinking about how to take care of self, what they could do to harm other people constantly. Their mind was never on God.
So it completely depends on what exactly that means. But let's say, for instance, that means that everyone on the planet at that point was a psychopathic, murdering, ravenous, evil person that's going to do crazy stuff and kill people, and society is not going to continue in a peaceful...
People was having sex with angels, and their mind was on evil continually. And only Abraham and a couple of members of his family were found to be, as a matter of fact, I think the Bible, not Abraham.
You mean Noah, right?
Noah, yes. Now, only Noah was found to be righteous in the eyes of God. And God spared a couple of members of his family, as well as a certain amount of the animals in the world. Now, whether or not we're talking about Mesopotamia or whether or not we're talking about the whole world, that's theology. That's a discussion for another day. But the fact of the matter is, was God wrong for flooding the world? I'm very curious to hear what you're going to say with this. And I'm sure that people who are going to be watching this is going to be curious too.
Yep. From an objective standpoint, like I said, depending on what exactly it was meant by that their minds were on evil all the time. If that means that everyone, like I said, is a psychopathic murderer, or just plain nuts like Charles Manson or whatever, then no. I mean, wiping out that population would get closer. And if Noah really was the only person that was worth saving, because God knows everything, and he knows... Noah and his family members, they're the only ones worth saving. And by saving those 8 people, I think it was, and having them repopulate the world with people that are less evil or not evil, I guess, depending on how you view that theology, then no, that moral action, or that would have been a moral action to wipe out all the psychopathic, murdering, ravenous, evil people and leave just the good ones. If it was true that only those 8 people were good, then no. I mean, it's kind of like saying,
you saying that he was morally good for doing it then?
If we take the story word for word verbatim the way it's said, and their minds were on evil.
Word for word verbatim the way it's described in the Bible. Is he morally good?
Well, it's not a simple question like yes or no, though. It depends on what the meaning was of their minds were on evil all the time. So yes, qualifying that to say that they were all evil and Noah was the only good person.
But it's a simple question. If the people were everything that you claim that they are, was God morally good?
Right. If Noah was the only good person and everybody else was psychos, then sure.
Based on the descriptions that you're giving. Okay, cool. Because they was having sex with angels and they were doing their own thing and whatnot. Cool. Was God morally...
I don't know, sex with angels sounds good.
Not when all of them were always male. I don't know about that. Well, actually, typically with the women, that's you're right. Yeah, with the women. But let me ask you the next question now. Was God morally good when he created the lake of fire? Where people are going to be thrown into that place for all of eternity for not turning from their sins. So a lot of people on YouTube got it wrong when they're saying for not loving God or believing what Christians say. No, for not turning from their sins.
doesn't the Bible say somewhere that he didn't make it for that purpose? He made it for the devil and
Matthew chapter
his
25.
evil angels.
Matthew chapter 25.
So then when he created it, if that's his moral objective to get rid of I don't know, that's kind of an interesting one. If he made it specifically to get rid of anybody that opposes him as a dictator, then no, that's kind of morally wrong. But if he knows everything and knows that these people are evil,
he's a dictator and whatnot. But in fact, God created the created hell or the lake of fire for the devil and his angels, and everyone that follows him or follows his way of thinking are going to join him. All those who reject Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior are going to end up in this place. I hate to say this,
so now
but if you continue to be an atheist, that's where you're going to end up going. So, is God morally good for creating a prison or a place like that? Yes or no?
Well, and here I think there's an important distinction here. We're going back into objective morality versus absolute. What was God's objective for making that? What was the goal? And is the goal for the maximum flourishing and the maximum number of
all those who rebel against his holiness, against his purpose, against everything that he originally made. I mean, when he finished making man, he said man was good. Man chose to disobey God, and man has been in this continuous rebellion since Adam and Eve. And only a certain percentage of people, I don't know exactly what that percentage is, have repented of their sins and have come to Jesus Christ, thus avoiding that place called hell. But is God morally good for creating a place called hell in the lake of fire for the devil and his angels and all those who follow him?
And the key point here is to judge the morality of that specific action, we have to know God's objective. So if his objective is to get the most amount of people, the maximum number of people into heaven where they can flourish and have the most maximum benefit possible, then based on that objective, then yes, creating a place or disposing of people that are going to minimize or attempt to minimize the flourishing of the people in heaven and separating them would be a moral action based on that objective. But then we're still in the land of that being the closed system.
Based on what?
And that being the objective. We're still judging the morality of that action based on the objective, not on some absolute term.
Sure about that?
Because if you try and say it's an absolute, yes.
Okay, cool.
The way you've described it and the way that you want me to judge it.
We both believe in absolutes.
Well, when you say absolutely sure about that, it's not the same as making absolute moral judgment.
You are making an absolute moral judgment right now. You gave all the criteria, all the circumstances on why it would be good, and you ultimately said it was good.
Objective. But that's objective, not absolute.
Based on what?
We're judging the morality of that.
And you're basing it on an absolute moral authority. I don't know if you see it yet, though.
No.
But you're basing it on an absolute moral authority. When you're talking, that those are people. Just hear me out. Those people might think you're doing it based on circumstances or what do you call that word? Empathy. No, there is an absolute there is an absolute standard or absolute authority making that judgment you just made, and that person would be you. You're your own absolute authority in this particular matter. You're the one who's making.
It's not
coming up. Just hear me out a minute. You're the one actually coming out and saying that. Look, this would be good under these particular things. God made it because of the devil, and these people were all wicked and evil. Then yes, God, this is a good place that God created for these particular people and whatnot. Okay, but you being your own absolute authority are actually is the one who's saying, look, this is good under this circumstance. This is good in that circumstance. This is good in this circumstance. This is good in that circumstance. So we all believe.
But I think we're coming. Even you. We're coming. Okay, and I don't know if you noticed the time. I know you mentioned you want to keep it under an hour. I don't know. My timer says 54 minutes.
Yeah,
okay.
6 minutes.
Okay. So I just want to mention here we are coming back full circle to where I started. I think with the whole morality is based on a closed system with the participants inside of it, and anybody that's not a participant outside of it can't make absolute judgment. So when you ask me, is it moral for God to create the lake of fire, you can only judge the morality of that action based on the objective and the reason that it's done. What's the overall objective?
Based on the absolute morality. I mean, based on the absolute standard.
Well, it's not absolute, because I can ask and I say, okay, based on if the objective, if the end goal in mind is to get as many people into heaven, benefiting as maximum possible and being as happy as possible because they're in heaven with God, based on that objective and that goal is creating the lake of fire moral. Without,
didn't create the
in
lake
the
of
absence
fire.
of an objective or the absence...
But God did not create the lake of fire so people can go to heaven. God created the lake of fire to punish sinners.
Right, but it's there based on the objective to get the most amount of people in heaven. The lake of fire, based on the Bible and theology, is there to separate people that aren't supposed to be in heaven, that are rejecting God or don't want to be there and are going to make a bad time for the people in heaven. I know I'm oversimplifying this. I'm trying to be quick so we don't run out of time. You can't judge that action absent a goal. Like, if you just ask me, is it moral for God to have created the lake of fire? If that was the exact question, I can't possibly answer it unless I know what the end goal is. What's the result of that action, and is it getting me closer to...
Well, with that being said, God is the one who created actually, I give you two examples. God is the one who created the lake of fire, and he is the one who determines who's going to go there and who isn't. And it's not going to be based on objective morality. It's going to be based on, this is the reason why I made it. This is what you people chose to do, and this is where you're going to end up if you can continue to do it. The other proof, or rather the other argument that I'm going to make, that an absolute, that you do need an absolute, and all of us, all of us, every man, woman, and child on this planet, are our own absolute authorities, because you have to come up with or rather, you can look at the circumstances, and then you can judge for yourself and say, you know what? As my own final authority, and the only reason I'm saying to you, your own final authority, is because, as an atheist, you don't, submit yourself to God, okay? Who obviously will be a higher authority. You become your own final authority when you come up with, when you come out and you say, you know what, then in this case, yes, the lake of fire is good because of these particular circumstances. But it doesn't change the fact that you're making that decision based on an absolute authority, not just objective morality.
I want to clarify. It's not. I don't judge the morality of the creation of the lake of fire on circumstances. It's based on the objective. What's the end goal, and then does that action get you closer to or further away from that end goal?
Okay.
So basically.
And I think atheists on YouTube that disagree with you. They're going to watch this video and they're going to think that God is sick for creating a place called the Lake of Fire. I guarantee you, if they watch this entire debate, they're going to mention in the comment section that they don't agree with you, which would suggest that all this is just a matter of opinion according to the atheist community. But for me, it's always going to be the case that God was right. Because he is the one who determines what is right and what is wrong, because he is our absolute standard. He's the one who tells us what is good and what is evil, and he tells us why these things are good and evil. Okay? Now, mind you, again, we're not talking about compromise, we're not talking about forgiveness, we're not talking about all those other factors. All we're talking about is God saying that this is right and that this is wrong, and it never ever changes.
Okay, and I wish we had a little more time. Maybe we could pick this up later on and do another one or something. But I want to contrast then at the end here the difference between the objective morality and absolute morality. In objective, you're basing the actions.
You got to do it in less than a minute and 30 seconds.
Okay, I'll be quick. So in objective morality, you're basing actions morality based on whether or not they get you closer to or further away from the end goal. In absolute morality, it's right because, in this case, God said...
Well, we lost Trogdor. I guess he'll be back soon. But I just want to let you guys know, if you guys like this little format of debate we're doing on like about an hour, simply add me to oovoo. I'm XX.